All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining this next edition of 30 Minutes with a Hacker. We're all packed here in a conference room. We've got SHI here as our guest, and Philip Armbrust and Denny Trujillo are joining us, and we've got a number of the typical engineers/hackers that are in the room. I wanted to take a minute though just to kind of to set the stage and give a little bit of the background for those of you that haven't listened to these calls in the past. We have Brett Scott and Josh Hart, John Garner, Daniel Seth, and Dylan Hudson. These guys have got decades of experience in the industry, not just working with companies, helping them build their IT, but have actually been on the doing the white hat hacking and penetration testing, doing the vulnerability assessments, both on the offensive and the defensive side. So John Garner's got a ton of experience in the Fortune 500, working in SOCs, really managing those, and he's really strong on the defensive side. You've got Josh Hart, who's very strong offensively, done a ton of penetration testing, been in the industry for a number of years. Brett's probably the dinosaur in the group who's been here the longest and has just a ton of industry experience. In fact, is involved with our government and things that we can't talk about protecting this country. And these guys are very much in the trenches on a daily basis. I'll just put it that way. Enough said on that. They definitely know what they're doing. Dylan Hudson is also with us and very strong from a penetration standpoint and really good at social engineering and understanding that. So you have some contributions. I want to turn it over to SHI in just a second, but to introduce them, we've got Philip Armbrust. Armbrust. Did I pronounce that right?
Yep.
Okay. So he's a regional solutions manager, 20 years in the industry, and what I love about it is that both Philip and Denny have been on the end user side of it, building and working with teams. I think Philip started out with PIX firewalls and got all the way up into doing security and network teams and managing those, and has just a ton of industry experience. Denny as well, 16 years in the industry as well. Started as a network engineer, got into working for the CEO as the head of security for a film school. So been in the trenches there before getting recruited over to do consulting. So both of these guys have really real world experience. So Denny, I'm going to kick it over to you, maybe just to give a little brief overview of SHI and what your capabilities are, and then we'll kind of get into the conversation.
Yeah. So SHI, we're an $11 billion international reseller. I've been around since 1989, and fun fact, we're actually the largest woman minority-owned business in the U.S. And really, our goal is to help customers select, deploy, and manage technology, which cybersecurity is a big part of.
Okay, awesome. So the topic today is, we've had many different calls. Get into the different the cool aspects of cybersecurity and what's hot, what are the current trends, but what we're really wanted to zero in on are what are the fundamentals, because it's really important that we bring it back to some of the basics, and that's what we really wanted to talk about. So I'm going to let Josh kind of set the table on this topic as we get into it.
Yeah, so as we had talked about in our last conversation, 30 Minutes with a Hacker, and then after that, our Security Inside track, we were talking about how there's a lot of buzzword bingo in the industry and a lot of new and emerging technologies with AI, deep learning, with automating SOCs and workflows, and just how a lot of organizations are focusing on those next-gen solutions, whereas they overlook a lot of the common security posture and profile stuff that they need. If they have a SIEM, is it finely tuned? If they have a firewall, is it configured properly? And so that's where our conversation is today. We figured in talking with SHI, it's something they're facing in the marketplace, coming into customer environments and having to lead and bring people back to the basics and to a foundational understanding of security. So I think that's where we're going.
Philip, what are you seeing in the industry and what you guys are seeing out there from HSI?
Sure. I think on the theme of back to basics, coming off of RSA a couple weeks ago, you had 1,000 OEMs out there, and there's a solution for every problem that you didn't know you had, and all that sort of thing, right? And a lot of overlap. We still see that kind of vendor sprawl. You take RSA, you go to any kind of customer that we talk to, their ecosystem, security ecosystem, 60 to 80 tools is not uncommon. And then if you start to really delve in and figure out where are they getting value out of that, where are they getting return, we see a lot of opportunity there for organizations to streamline, reduce costs. I mean, think about it, whether you're managing identity or you're patching a server, everything has a cost to it. You can't patch everything. You hope you're managing every identity, right? And you're managing in the right way for privileged identity, all these sorts of things, right? I mean, I've already said like 8 buzzwords, but you see my point is you think about it, there's a cost of doing business. The average budget we're seeing is between 4 and 6% of what our organizations are investing. Now, if you have 6% of that total IT budget going to security, where do you put it? So I'll pause there and open it up to the group because
I'm curious how often you see an overlap in tools and technology organizations have. If they have, you mentioned, what was it, 60 to 80 different types of tools. How often someone forgot a previous security admin already bought something to do the thing, and then they bought something else down the road because its marketing was different, and the old tool, which was configured to do stuff, is forgotten, and they start to try and integrate something.
Yeah, I mean, all the time. I mean, one of the best examples is if you think about organizations, they'll have a network team and they'll have a security team, right? And then they've got the next-gen firewall or, whatever there. And then they're co-managing a device. There's factions that break out, kind of like, I can't think of the best analogy here, but essentially we'll see multiple OEMs in there doing the same thing, firewall stacked behind each other, simply because of teams, the way they operate, and they think about, I'm network, I got to scale, I got to make SD-WAN work, I got to go fast, and then you think security is like, well, I need to protect this, and I need these controls in all these places, so then I've got kind of unintentionally a layered approach, which just adds overhead, and your cost goes up, and then we're back in the situation I just kind of opened up with, which is you've got 60 to 80 tools.
Yeah, I think another issue that contributes to that problem is if you think when these organizations first make the investment into some of these tools, they do X, right? But they don't stay doing X for very much long, right? Security is always evolving, and so their capabilities continue to evolve. So I think when they look back at their initial investment and maybe 2-3 years later down the road, there's probably additional capabilities that have been added to that solution that could absolutely help in the consolidation of maybe some overlapping tools that they have in their environment.
So one of the things that John and I have constantly talked about on these calls is collaboration amongst teams. And so one of the things you hit on earlier was that you have security and network guys doing different things or supporting different companies, so to speak, because they like the way one does X over the other, maybe. Right, and so they lead and propose that project for their budget and the numbers that they receive. How do you guys, we attribute it to siloing within organizations. So network guys, right, you talked about your background earlier, network guys may not talk with security guys may not be interfacing with the desktop team. How often are you guys seeing that organizations themselves do end up siloing? And then my follow-up question for that is, do you do any or offer any types of services where you try and bring different leaders or heads of the different departments together to, eliminate the silos and bring about collaboration in the organization?
Yeah, so unfortunately we see that way too often.
Mm-hmm.
And when I run into an organization that has broken down those barriers and they are collaborating, I mean, they truly shine, right? I don't understand why culturally we've kind of divided, right? But to answer your question as far as do we offer any services to help, not directly like a service, like, hey, it's a formal service that they pay for, but we almost come in as like an outsider, like a mediator between both parties, right? And it might start off by having individual conversations with each one and understanding maybe what are their pains, but then we kind of sit back and we start thinking about like, hey, there's a lot of overlap in initiatives, and if maybe they just collaborate a little bit more. And so we'll try to facilitate that, like, hey, did you know that Joe over in IT has a very similar initiative? Like, oh, I had no idea, right? We don't talk to them. Well, hey, maybe we should, because I think collectively we can help each other out here, right? So that's how we've been able to help a lot of our customers.
So one of the services we were talking about earlier that SHI offers is tabletopping, doing those exercises that walks people through their top 5 threat concerns or whatever and puts their playbooks and incident response policies into action. When you guys offer those services, do you bring in individuals from different departments and groups within the organization that may not be exposed to security on a daily basis?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you could be successful in a tabletop exercise by just having one side of the equation.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it absolutely involves everybody, and the more the merrier, right? So like, I'll kind of throw that question back over to Philip. Like, what have you seen in terms of?
Yep. So we've been in a lot of those situations, and I'll call it brokering conversations, because a lot of these exercises that we facilitate will bring contributors or SMEs into, and the first thing they're asking is like, why am I here? Like, I don't get it, right? And so coming from kind of an autonomous view, us coming in, we found we sometimes get a little more traction to say like, well, here's what your peers in the industry are doing. You know, having you as part of this, whether you're on an operations team and infrastructure, or, you know, like the executive level, you have a role. You may just not know it yet, right? And it really educating them on what their role is. We see a lot of organizations that do these exercises, but the effectiveness of them is limited to who's participating. So lots of regulatory bodies mandate that you do them. Now, the quality and the output you get for them varies, right? So that's where we think to do one of these successful, I won't say the more the merrier. We don't want to get too crazy with it, but having the right SMEs in there is paramount to really get quality output, as opposed to, yeah, we checked the box and we did the exercise.
Well, it sounds like you guys are objectively helping them to achieve efficiencies that they would not naturally be able to achieve. So if you're a company that has a limited security spend, for example, you're helping them to spend each dollar that they have more wisely by not wasting it on competing initiatives that overlap. So that's a tremendous service that obviously an outside third party would be able to achieve over trying to work this out amongst yourselves. I mean, everyone has their this is my initiative, and if you're competing, then it's me versus you, whereas objectively you can look at this and say, you know, this is the right direction to go, and as a third party, you can be that mediator, and the achievement that has occurred is really to your customer, who is achieving better use of their dollar spend for cybersecurity, which means they have more money to do smarter things with their cybersecurity.
Yes, so Brett, you bring up a good point, right? And thinking about SHI, right? We don't manufacture a product. We kind of have a little slogan. We say we manufacture an experience. And what is the value with working with a reseller like SHI, right? So if you're talking to vendor X, and going back to like the RSA comment, I was just there, 1,000 plus. Maybe you guys have all seen the meme where you see 3 Spider-Men looking at each other, pointing at each other, and everyone's saying like the exact same thing, right? Where I think we add the most value is we come in and we try to put ourselves in the customer's shoes and understand, like, if I were you, I was you, right, 8 years ago, and I have $10 to spend, I want to take a look into basic security. Like, what am I doing today? And instead of trying to figure out, like, hey, talk to me about AI and deep learning and all these awesome things that, like, people probably want to have a conversation around, but, like, operationally, like, is that going to move the needle for you and where you're at today? And where should you spend that next dollar? That's the value that we bring, right? Because we're not in there trying to sell something that's in the truck, right? It's like, hey, we have a set of technologies and this is all you could buy from us. Like, no. Like, we genuinely are just trying to help our customers better their overall security.
Well, that's awesome, because again, the fact that you guys continue to focus on the fundamentals is really essential, because if you don't have a solid foundation, it really doesn't matter how pretty the building is on top or what you add to it as far as adornments. If you don't have the fundamentals, nothing is going to save you. So I know that John talks a lot about what the things that most companies should be doing at the fundamental level to build the foundation to be additive to those other things.
So I was hearing all this, I'm having flashbacks to my first enterprise dedicated SOC experience, because it was an older network, it was a large network, globally distributed, and you had the 60 to 80 solution problem. I was there for 2 years, and that was still being like, oh my gosh, we have that tool. I wish I would have known when this happened, right? And then you had the network architects that had actually designed everything and implemented everything over time had either gotten fired or quit or gone on to do other things. So that body of knowledge that knew how everything worked just didn't exist anymore. So what that company easily could have done to better themselves is simple things like network discovery. Like, what do I have? I think that loops back around to like the SANS top 20. Number 1 and number 2 is what software do you have, what hardware do you have, and it sounds so stupidly simple, but in that scenario was case in point, right? Like, we didn't even know what we had, we didn't know what tools we had, and we had God mode access to the network, and we still didn't know what was there, So it's understanding your network, I think even Rich Larkin is one of the talks he gave. He was like, just take a piece of paper and a crayon. That's all you need. And you can do more to figure out your network than most tools out there. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, and the thing is that most everybody is embarrassed to say, I have no idea what's running on my own network. But if you get them inside, get them aside or buy them a beer, they will all tell you the exact same thing, and that is, I have no idea what's running on my network. And the people who think they know the most generally know the least about what's running on their network. They are always the ones that are most surprised when they go, you told me you had 1,000 devices on this network. There are 1,300 that are talking. So what's going on here? And so when you don't know what's on your network, how on earth could you possibly be effective in any cybersecurity if, in that example, a third of your network you didn't even know was there?
Yeah, you have the owners of those, either the software or the hardware, like I said, just don't work there anymore. Documentation's missing. Yeah.
Here's the reality. Like, good security is probably boring.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
and it's like
it's hygiene. It really is.
Yeah. It's the things that we don't necessarily wake up wanting to do on a day-to-day basis, but that's what's really going to keep us more secure, right?
But again, doing the cool things is neat, but the thing is that you're playing a game with your own future, because you can be doing all the cool stuff, but if you get blown up because your company is destroyed because you failed to have fundamentals, then that game is over. If you really want to play and do the cool stuff, you're going to make sure that your house is in order, your race car can race, that you have the foundations to build a good cybersecurity program.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, I would say that the foundations are important, but even the foundations are evolving. So they're kind of cool and sexy. I mean, you think about like patching, right? I mean, it didn't come out quite like I wanted to. But in all seriousness, I mean, now you can get, there's OEMs out there that will tell you what's being exploited in the wild. So, and you can say, okay, is my patching program effective? It used to be like, oh, I could do this many patches in this month, and I could do these change windows, and I was successful. Well, if you're not patching the things that are actually being exploited in the wild or actively talked about in the dark web, how much further forward are you? So that's a fundamental thing. That's a foundational thing, but that's evolved. I could give security awareness training, these other things, access management. They're all fundamental things, but they have evolved. So I'd like to put it like, do the hygiene, but make sure your hygiene's evolving along with the industry as opposed to kind of your stance.
And part of that is knowing the industry you're in, right? Like, anyone who thinks they can get into security and just sit dormant is in the wrong industry.
Yeah.
You have to be on a consistent basis of keeping an ear to the ground as to what's going on around you, what's emerging, what's changing. APTs, they use old techniques and they use emerging techniques, but a lot of the times they're going back to not launching a 0-day because 0 days are cost effective. They're going to lose something that is going to be worth more to them down the road than it is today. So they're going to rely on something that's tried and true. So what's interesting, what I found when it relates to a patch management perspective, when you talk to an organization about certain services that they've had running that have vulnerabilities in them for a while, right? They say, oh, okay, I understand that. We're going to mitigate it the way that we can. Until they truly understand the full impact of it, like through a pen test, through adversary emulation, do they fully understand that they need to pour time and effort into either decommissioning those systems or changing the method they do things. We're talking about agility in a network that moves, in an industry that moves very slow. For example, we had a national bank that was still running Windows XP systems because they had a technology that was used in the financial industry that is dependent upon that operating system. So they did everything they could to segment it with firewalls and to change rules and put honeypots in the network and check for IDS and anything that would be coming across the wire as an exploit, but they didn't realize because of their any trust relationship between domains, one could just elevate their privileges in an unsafely guarded domain, so to speak, or something that has lower controls because it's not as high fidelity versus something they've poured much time and effort into being high fidelity just because the operating system is out of date.
Well, getting back to your point, some of the fundamentals are new, right? We are now living in a time of information warfare, and never more than this year will people really connect with the concept of information warfare. So the fundamentals now include how do you protect the humans from being hacked? So we have two of the guys here on the tech data team that do social engineering engagements all the time, and I'm sure you'd be happy to share with us some of the things that you do when you approach an organization. How am I going to extract information from the humans, which is more efficient, less risky, and ultimately gets you more stuff? So that adds to some of the excitement, because this is a whole new realm for people to take into account. So you want to talk a little bit about your experiences?
Phishing in general. I mean, one of our engagements, we pretty much made up a web page that looked exactly like one of their company portals, and people were clicking on it. Phishing, voicemail phishing, it's essentially what I call getting paid to prank call people, you know, and get them to give you stuff over the phone. I mean, it's surprisingly easy.
Well, I also feel that some of the difficulties is, I mean, we do this like our job's 9 to 5. How much do I care about my company's data versus my own? And some employees, like not everyone works in security. So why should I care if I click this link? IT will handle it. They'll just clean up my computer and I'll move on. But I mean, like as you were stating with the phishing campaigns, they're cheaper. Why even bother exploiting when I can just click one button, send out to 1,000 people, and all I need is one? And from there, you can get all over a network. There are multiple companies that get money lost and get exploited very quickly. Just with like stuff like Emotet, I mean, that and just how powerful that malware is and how quickly it can spread. And I mean, just a year later, they're seeing that it has other modules that assist it with spreading. And just with phishing, as you said, it's pretty much just building trust. Why exploit a computer when I can exploit the person and just walk right through the front door?
You know, I kind of wonder around this, where a lot of this comes back into like security awareness training, right? And to your point, it's like, does the user go through that process and truly embrace it and believe in it, or are they just kind of going through some kind of training module or exercise where they check the box and we're now compliant, right? Yep. But I wonder if I look back into maybe our younger generation, if the things that they're doing, it's now becoming the norm, right? And I kind of think about my early days when I was into like PC multiplayer gaming, right? It's like, as a kid, I really cared about my accounts, right? And there was tons of, you know, people trying to hijack those accounts and social engineering and whatnot. And I look now, it's like, you know, things like Minecraft, is that the name of the game now? It's like, I know there's a lot of 2FA where a lot of these companies are even incentivizing, like Steam, for example, is one where if they enable 2FA, they would give them like $5 game credits, right? So I wonder if, as the younger generation grows into the kind of professional workforce, if we're going to start seeing that kind of mature a little bit.
And what's interesting is you bring up a good point about different organizations that are kind of in the technology field and see how easily their users can be exploited, take the precautions necessary to adapt and adjust and be agile. You brought up security awareness training. There are many different platforms out there that will streamline the automation of sending out phishing emails. But how often are engineers actually going in there and looking at the difference of a template sent by that engine and that solution versus something that is being sent out into the wild? More often than not, the messaging is different. So security awareness training in many ways is teaching people to look for certain key things that are abnormal and different versus something that could be coming from someone who is authoritative in the like of, I'm emulating a director, BEC scams, right? You're emulating someone in the financial department at the organization, telling them to wire money to this new account, right? If your headers are right, if your signature looks right, and you use the correct messaging, people just fall into the workflow of autopilot for the day, right? And that is where I think a lot of the different solutions that we talk about, basic security tools, also have to adapt as our industry does, where we have to demand different vendors to either change the way that they're templating or provide customization so that you can go in and make adjustments and changes based on the latest threat intelligence or IOCs that are out there to see if your security awareness training is being as effective as you think it is versus just the ad hoc boilerplate templates that you send out every month to just, you know, check the box for you.
Mm-hmm. Going beyond or touching on what you were saying with the boilerplate check the box, I think one thing the security industry as a whole needs to do, and I know that's something that we're really trying to do at the cyber range, is communicate the why of cybersecurity. Mm-hmm. Like doing the phishing exercises is good of, you know, recognizing a potential attack, but if the user isn't aware of what the importance of or the consequences of clicking those things and really understanding the damage that can happen it's going to be in one ear out the other. So we need to find a way as an industry to really communicate that effectively to the grander audience, I think.
Yeah, I'll give you a very real-world example. Tech Data has 14,000 employees. We've been doing anti-phishing training and ongoing campaigns for 3 years. There are still 8 people in this company that will click anything that you send them, right? So at a certain point, you're like, we've been at this for 3 years. At what point do they finally get it? So the fact is that for those folks that still are having, and they've been through the training and they've been through the anointing, retraining, and all the things that you would think would change the behavior, the difference is they really just don't understand why IT can't handle this, or why they have to be Mr. and Mrs. Jack Rogers to be able to fight off these terrible, very effective cyber threats. They're saying, why can't you help me? I'm obviously not good at this. What do you do for a living if it's not to help me overcome myself? And so getting back to those fundamentals, you really have to have your basics in order. If you don't have the things that you need as a foundation, then all of your work and all of your investment can be undone by someone who says, well, why did you let that link get to me in the first place? So it is really important that you have that stable base that you project outward from, and then you can affect change with vendors. Then you can affect impact with your people. You can make things happen for your organization. And all the while, working with partners like SHI, you can also save money on your spend, which is, I think, a fantastic service that you guys offer.
So like beyond security awareness training like we talked about earlier and identity access management, what are some additional controls that you guys look to or look for when you enter an organization for them to have as a baseline that, okay, these guys have the basics of security down and we can move into and adapt to something more advanced?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably visibility is probably the key thing here. I mean, you mentioned number 1, number 2 on the list. You know, to be able to do that, you need that visibility. And so things like SIM, configuration management maybe is the first thing. CMDB, 50-50 shot on whether I actually see that. But I think that getting to the next level of that is that SIM. And I think that's the biggest hurdle for most customers, simply because the overhead associated to care and feed one of those. So I'm seeing the market respond. So some OEMs are pivoting, I think, in a good way, where it's a service-based model. We're going to take on X amount of responsibility for running all these sort of things, and your team's going to, consume what comes out of this and take action. Because if you've got a team of 3 to 5 people, and you just threw a SIM into the environment and a 5,000 person org, you probably need 3 to 5 people more, right? And so I think that I don't say we had a hiccup in the industry, but it felt like that for a while, because I think people said, "Ooh, I want a SIM because I know I need it," and they're not wrong. But when they went to actually consume it and operationalize it, it was a big oh, wow, that's a lot of lift. So, yeah.
Anytime I talk to customers and I kind of start going down the list to understand what is the current state, a lot of times they check off the boxes on, call it the half of the CIS top 20. But then you ask a basic question, and well, when's the last time you did a health check or a configuration validation for it to be optimized, right? It's then people start getting a little uncomfortable, oh, well, Joe, did you do that? No, I haven't done that in a couple of years. It's but now here you're asking about, implementing some, next-gen tech or whatnot, some honeypots, and honeypots sound great, right? Super easy technology. That's only going to create more noise for you, right? And so I always kind of go back, what, even if we just take it down to super, super basics, right? One, even if you're doing on a spreadsheet, let's take some kind of basic inventory. Even if you're doing a piece of paper and some crayons, let's draw what the network might look like, right? Let's identify, are we up to date with the most known critical patches available, right? Let's try to make some effort there before we go and try to spend money on buying these cool gadget tools, right? So hey, let's make sure your endpoints, your email, your firewalls, those are optimized in configuration and they're in a healthy state, right? I think that's going to get you much further than going out and spending money on things like SIM platforms or, whatever the next buzz thing might be out there.
My guess is most people don't even realize how much what they had got changed when you add or remove componentry from the infrastructure of your network. It can completely change your picture and your configuration, and I'm confident that probably 2% of the people who will ever listen to this call will say, oh yeah, when we do this, we do a reevaluation, we do another security posture assessment, we do vulnerability assessment, then we do pen tests on that. everyone typically views it as a past pawn, right? I've done this thing, that pawn is now behind me, moving on to the next stuff. And that is exactly what the bad guys are exploiting. That's exactly what our pen testers are finding is this thing that they set up that they no longer even want to test is the vulnerable thing. That's how I got onto their network, and they never saw me because nothing was looking at that thing because it changed.
I would say if you're a company that does decide to pull the trigger on buying a solution, think beyond the initial cost. Think about spending the money on the talent to configure it properly, and then spend the money on the talent to maintain it and watch it. Like there's a long-term ongoing cost with each tool that I think most people forget about.
And make sure the people that are watching that wire are abreast to the new and emerging threats as well, and they know what's going on.
We have a great example of that. So if you buy a great video system, right, and you see a guy in a truck, and he gets out of the truck and he runs away from your building, people who've been in the military, they're going to say, we're about to get bombed, right? But if you sit there and you have someone who's not trained, they go, oh, I wonder why that guy left his truck there. He seems to like he's running somewhere else and he's got a truck. Why wouldn't he use that? So if you don't know what you're looking at, it doesn't matter that you have a great video system. All you're going to do is get a really good picture of how all your people died. So it's one of those things where, like what you were saying, you have to invest in helping your people to know what they're looking at, to say when someone pulls up with a giant truck and then runs away, duck, you know. Yeah. So, yeah, it's a great point.
One thing I would just add to this, I think there's been a overarching theme here, and you touched on it pretty heavily with the Windows 10 example, or Windows XP, example, is technical debt. I mean, your security org and the maturity of what you're able to accomplish, you're somewhat dependent on your IT ops as well. And so things like technical debt, legacy systems, things like that, I think you have to be realistic in your sphere of influence and what you can protect, and be able to illustrate that risk. Because with those things like you described, like Windows, nothing against Windows XP, but
it was great when it came out.
It was great. I love it. I think you got to be able to make sure that you're engaged with the right people at the right levels to have those conversations to get everyone kind of realistic. You can give me a 10% cybersecurity budget, but if I've got a bunch of IoT and things that I can't patch, then all I can do is wrap it up and cross my fingers.
Yeah.
So
keep your resume up to date.
Well, I know we're getting up to the 30-minute mark here. I just wanted to say it was great that Philip, you and Denny were able to be here. I know we're in the conference room of the cyber range that we just launched. Spent a lot of money on it. It's to help with the skills gap shortage and being able to train people. What was your guys' impression? I know you guys were able to tour the facility, and that's one reason we were able to have you join on this call. But what were your impressions?
Yeah, I loved it. So I've been to kind of fancy EBC showrooms before, and they tend to be like manufacturer specific. I like the idea of coming to a place that is agnostic, that can help tie all this together. Some of the other things that I heard about today that I think are really cool are things like your cloud range, right? Where there's not a good answer out doing like blue team enablement. They do have those 5-7 day courses that you might be able to take, but how do you measure that? And I think something like a cyber range is absolutely awesome because you can measure it and then you can ideally make it continuous, right? Yeah. I almost see that as even like a team building exercise, right? You think about taking like the last Friday of the month and get all your SOC analysts in a room for 4 hours every, once a month and just go through those exercises. I think that'd be super cool.
So I thought it was awesome. I'm going to bring it back to the people comments. People is a common thread that we are all going to have. And I think that the skill set, it's no joke. There is a shortage of cybersecurity professionals. And I feel like, I know that has to improve in order to improve all the things we talk about in here. You have to have the trained professionals to manage, deploy, select, all that sort of stuff with gear. And so that's kind of part of I'm pretty close to your mission statement, I'm assuming, because all the things that you're developing are to enable others to learn how to be good at security, so to speak. So, yeah, blown away. Good
We're
stuff.
having a lot of fun doing it, and really appreciate you guys coming today. I thought our dialogue and our conversation was fantastic, and again, we know that this is having an impact and it's helping people get better at cybersecurity. So I very much appreciate your help in all of this.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for your participation on the call, and look forward to the next month's call on 30 Minutes with a Hacker. Thank you.